Sir, you picked the wrong woman to break. Officer Jason Holloway laughed when he heard those words. Sir, he shouldn't have. Because the quiet 48-year-old he'd just shoved against the hood of his cruiser wasn't a nobody. She was a federal investigator who had spent 20 years hunting men exactly like him. And the second his handcuffs clicked shut, he sealed the fate of every dirty badge in that county. Well, if you believe no one deserves to be crushed just for being underestimated, up and stay with me all the way to the end. The name of the city you're watching from in the comments and see how far Emily's story travels tonight. Ma'am, put your hands where I can see them. Emily Carter stopped walking. She didn't panic. She didn't flinch. She'd heard that tone 1,000 times in her career, and she knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't a request. It was a decision that had already been made about her before she'd said a single word. No problem here, officer, she said quietly. I was just walking to my car. I said, hands where I can see them. She raised them. Palms open. The old leather bag on her shoulder slid down to her elbow. She let it hang there so they could see she wasn't reaching for anything. There were two of them. The younger one, the one doing the talking, had his hand resting on his belt like he was hoping she'd give him a reason. His name tag said Holloway. The second one hung back near the cruiser, arms crossed, chewing gum, watching her, the way a man watches something he's already bored with. His tag said Cole. You match the description of a woman involved in a disturbance 2 blocks from here, Holloway said. What description? Don't ask me questions. I'm asking because I've been walking for 20 minutes. Officer, I haven't been near any disturbance. If you'll let me show you my identification, we can clear this up in 10 seconds. Keep your hands up. Emily kept her hands up. She was 50 feet from a government building. There were cameras on that corner. She'd counted them out of habit the moment she'd parked. The way she counted every camera on every street she ever walked was, in her line of work, you never knew which one might one day tell the truth for you. Look at them again now. 3 of them, one on the lamppost, over the building entrance, one tucked under the awning of the pharmacy across the road. 3 cameras, she thought. Remember that. I'm going to lower one hand and reach for my back pocket, she said, keeping her voice level, keeping it slow, narrating every movement the way she'd been trained. But my credentials are in a black wallet. I am a federal. I didn't tell you to move. I'm telling you what I'm about to do so nobody gets surprised. This is supposed to work. Holloway crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. He grabbed her raised wrist, twisted it down, and behind her, he felt her shoulder wrench in a way that sent white heat down her arm. She didn't cry out. She'd trained herself out of that a long time ago. Her breath caught, hard, and for 1 second, the whole street tilted. Pardon me, she said, calm flat, on purpose. It on the recording, if there was one. You are hurting my shoulder and I am not resisting. Then stop talking. Officer Holloway, listen to me carefully. My name is Emily Carter. I am a federal investigator. Identification is in my back left pocket. The moment you look at it, you're going to understand that you are about to make the worst mistake of your entire career. Cole finally pushed off the cruiser, looked over, unhurried, still chewing. Federal investigator, he repeated, and he smiled, and the smile was the worst part. It wasn't cruel exactly. He was amused, like she'd told him she was a princess. You hear that, Jason? We got ourselves a Fed. Yeah. Third, where's your suit, agent? Where's your black SUV? Feds don't walk around in flat shoes and a bag that looks like it came out of a thrift store. That's exactly why I'm good at my job, Emily said. Cole's smile flickered. Just for a second, she saw it. She'd spent 2 decades reading faces across interrogation tables. Saw the smallest crack opening as that first flash of what if she's telling the truth, and then she watched and decided to bury it. As burying it was easier because the alternative meant they'd already gone too far to go back. That was the moment Emily understood something cold. These 2 weren't just careless. They weren't just having a bad day and taking it out on the nearest quiet woman. Had felt doubt and chosen to ignore it. A man who ignores doubt that fast has done this before. Many times. And a man who's done it many times has been getting away with it, which meant somebody was letting him. This is bigger than these 2. This is a habit, and habits have protectors. Oh, Holloway said. I'd like to show you my credentials first. Turn around. I want you both to remember, Emily said, turning around slowly because she was not going to give them the reason they were so clearly hunting for. I offered you the easy way, 3 separate times. Whatever happens after this, you chose it. Holloway pulled her hands behind her back, went on. Too tight, on purpose. She felt the metal bite into the thin skin over the bones of her wrists, and she breathed through it. Turner, you have the right to remain silent, he started, and there was a bounce in his voice now, a little swagger, because this was the part he liked. I know my rights better than you do, Emily said. I've read them to more people than you've ever arrested. Sure you have. A woman across the street had stopped walking, holding a phone. Emily saw her, and Holloway saw Emily see her. Holloway's head turned. Keep it moving, ma'am, he barked at the woman. There's nothing to see here. The woman lowered the phone. She didn't put it away. Emily saw that too. The woman turned like she was leaving and kept the phone at her hip, angled back over her shoulder, filming. Good, Emily thought. Good, keep filming. However you are. You have no idea what you're recording. Knocked her to the cruiser. Holloway put his hand on top of her head to guide her into the back seat, and he did it harder than he needed to, tapping her skull down against the frame just enough to make a point. Not your head, he said, after he'd made sure she hadn't. Her slammed. Emily sat in the back of that cruiser with her hands cuffed behind her, her shoulders screaming, her wrists bleeding, a little where the metal had cut in. And she did the one thing that had kept her alive and effective for 20 years. Quiet inside. She stopped feeling the pain as pain, started filing it as evidence. The angle of the cuffs, number of the badge, the exact words Holloway had used. The exact moment Cole's smile had cracked. She replayed all of it, twice, the way you'd rewind a tape, because she knew that in 6 hours, or 6 days, or 6 months, someone would sit across a table from her and ask her to remember. She wanted every second of it burned into her mind, so deep no lawyer could shake it loose. Up front, the 2 officers were talking like she wasn't there. But you believe that? Federal investigator, Cole said. A raft. And laughed. They always got a story. My favorite was the guy who said he was the mayor's cousin. Which one? There's like 4 of those a year. They laughed together. Only listened. And she cataloged that too, the easy, practiced way they laughed about it. This wasn't nervous laughter. Nervous men don't laugh like that. This was the laughter of men who had done this. So many times it had become a joke between them. A routine, a game. You don't build a game like that alone. You build it when nobody ever makes you pay for it. Somebody has been catching every complaint before it lands. Us, she thought. Somebody has been making the paperwork disappear. She'd been circling that exact idea for 8 months. It was the part neither of them knew. Emily hadn't been walking near that government building by accident. She'd been 3 weeks from closing an investigation into a pattern of misconduct inside their department. False reports, evidence, missing complaints that vanished, witnesses who went silent overnight. Had been so careful she'd used a personal car. She'd worn nothing that marked her. Almost no one. And now, out of the entire county, officers who'd stopped a quiet blonde woman on a quiet street corner were the 2 names at the very center of her file. Emily didn't believe in coincidences. She'd learned to distrust them the way you learn to distrust a smell of smoke in a house that's supposed to be empty. Where she asked herself, is this random or did somebody point them at me? I didn't have the answer yet. But the question changed everything about how she was going to play the next 12 hours. At the station, they walked her past the front desk, past a bank of empty chairs, and Emily kept her head up. Not out of pride, out of strategy. She wanted every person in that building to see her face and see that she was calm. As calm women confuse men who are counting on fear. ID says nothing. Holloway announced to the room, picking up the black wallet he'd finally pulled from her back pocket. ID at all. Won't tell us who she is. Emily's jaw tightened. Hi, she said clearly, loud enough for the desk sergeant to hear. My federal credentials are in that wallet. He is looking at them right now. Holloway snapped the wallet shut. There, she's confused, he told the desk sergeant, tapping his own temple. Like this the whole ride. I am not confused. Third, read the badge number out loud. I'll say it with you. And she recited it, a long string of letters and numbers, bold and precise, the exact code stamped on the credentials in his hand. The desk sergeant looked up. It was small, just a flick of the eyes. Emily lived on small things, and she watched the sergeant's gaze move from her face away to the closed wallet and back to her face, question forming. Holloway saw it too. She probably memorized somebody's number off the internet, he said quickly. That Booker, disturbance and resisting. I did not resist, Emily said. There are 3 cameras on the corner where you stopped me. Colorado, there is a woman who filmed the entire arrest on her phone. I narrated every single one of my movements out loud so that any recording would show I complied. You put that in your report, Officer Holloway. You put in your report that I resisted, and you will be signing your name to a document that 3 cameras and a witness are about to call a lie. The room went quiet. All stopped chewing. For the first time, Holloway didn't have anything ready. Emily leaned in as much as she could with her hands still cuffed, and she lowered her voice, and she spoke only to him, but she made sure it carried just far enough. You still think I'm nobody, she said. You looked at me on that street, and you saw a tired, middle-aged woman with an old bag. Your whole body relaxed because you thought, this one won't fight back. I watched it happen on your face. And I'm telling you, man to man, as one professional to another, you read me completely wrong. And it is going to cost you everything you have. Holloway's jaw worked. Then he did what men like him always do when they feel the floor moving. Louder. Put her in holding. He snapped it cold. I'm sick of listening to her. You should be scared of listening to me, Emily said. Took her arm. The moment you stop hearing what someone's telling you is the exact moment you lose. They put her in a holding cell, alone. Emily sat on the cold bench. Finally, with no one watching, herself close her eyes and take one long breath all the way to the bottom of her lungs. Her shoulder throbbed. Her wrists stung. She was 50 feet inside a building full of the very people she'd spent 8 months investigating, and every one of them thought she was a confused nobody they could book and forget. Of all things, calm. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was a woman alone, and she knew better than anyone in that building what men who feel cornered were capable of. She'd read the files. She knew what happened to the ones who'd complained before her. Some of them had lost their jobs. Some of them had lost their homes. Some of them had simply stopped answering his phone one day, and nobody had ever heard from him again. And his file was one of the ones sitting on her desk with a question mark she'd never been able to erase. She was calm because she understood something they didn't. Kiss, she thought. They think they've caught me, she thought. They don't understand that they've just handed me the one thing I've been missing for 8 months. For 8 months, she'd had a pattern, but no proof. Complaints that vanished, but no fingerprints on the vanishing. That didn't match reality, but no way to show the moment reality got rewritten. Inference, all shadow. A judge would have thrown it out in an afternoon. And now tonight, they were going to write a report. They were going to sit down and put into an official document that Emily Carter had resisted arrest. A thing that 3 cameras and a stranger's phone would prove was false. They were going to lie in writing. In their own hand, own signatures. She'd spent 8 months trying to catch these men rewriting the truth. And they were about to do it for her. On paper tonight, over a woman they thought was too small to matter. Emily almost laughed. You didn't just make a mistake, she thought, staring at the gray cinder block wall. You made the exact mistake I've been waiting for you to make. Her thought pushed in behind it, the one she couldn't shake since the street corner. Unless it isn't a mistake at all. Because if they'd known who she was, if someone in that department had learned how close her investigation was getting, and had sent 2 of their most reliable enforcers to find any reason, to put her in a cell and rattle her and see what she knew, then this wasn't a lucky break. This was a warning. And a warning meant she was closer to the truth than she'd let herself believe. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she made a decision. "Officer," she called out, standing up, walking to the bars. "Officers, I get a phone call. I know I do. And I am going to use it right now." A younger officer she hadn't seen for appeared in the hallway, barely 30. He looked, she noted immediately, comfortable the way a man looks when he's been handed something he suspects is dirty and is trying very hard not to look at it too closely. "Oh," he said, "I'm aware. You gonna call a lawyer?" Emily looked at him, and she made a choice in that half second that she would replay many times in the months that followed. She said, "Not yet." The young officer blinked. "You don't want a lawyer?" "I want something a lawyer can't give me," Emily said. "I want the one thing every person in this building thinks I don't have." He led her to the phone. Her hands shook not from fear now, but from the pure focus of it, adrenaline finally arriving after she'd held it off for hours. She steadied them against the cold cellophane. She looked at the numbers, about who to call. She could call her supervisor, but she didn't yet know how deep the rot ran, or how many people upstream from these two officers had reasons to want her quiet. She'd spent 8 months learning not to trust the chain of command she was standing inside. The field office. But the field office would send a team would be slow, and slow was dangerous in a building where a man might decide overnight that a certain report needed to disappear before morning. There was only one number she trusted completely. One group of people who had never in 20 years let her down. One promise made to her a long time ago, by a man she'd loved and buried, that his brothers had never once broken. Take care of Emily. She's family. She could still hear Michael saying it. Hadn't been in the room when he'd said it to them. He'd been too weak by then to know she'd overheard from the hallway, but she'd carried those 5 words for years like a stone in her pocket. She took out only when she was truly alone. She had never once used them. Not when the medical bills came. When the house nearly went. Not when she'd been so tired and so afraid that she'd sat in her car outside her own home, unable to make herself walk inside. She'd kept them in her pocket, untouched, because she'd promised herself she'd only spend them when it truly mattered. Emily looked at the phone. She thought about the young officer's uncomfortable face, Cole's smile cracking and then closing over, Holloway saying no ID at all while holding her credentials in his hand. The man whose file ended in a question mark. The woman across the street still filming as she walked away. "Matters now," she thought. "God help me, it finally matters now." Dialed 3 rings. Then a voice answered low, steady, older, a voice that carried the weight of a man who had heard a lot of bad news over a lot of years and had learned to stay level no matter what came through the line. Emily opened her mouth, and for 1 second, 20 years of composure almost failed her, because saying it out loud made it real. She said, "It's Emily. Emily Carter, Michael's wife." There was a silence on the other end. It wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of a man sitting up straight, a man setting down whatever was in his hand, of a man who had waited a very long time for a call he'd hoped would never come and had always known might. Victor Reynolds said, and his voice had changed quieter, all the ease gone out of it. "Where are you?" "I'm in a holding cell." She kept her voice steady. I was proud of that. "County. 2 officers stopped me on the street for nothing. Evidence. I offered them my credentials 3 times. Off me, they lied about it, and they're about to write a report saying I resisted." "Resist? There are cameras. There's a witness. Are you hurt?" She hesitated. "My shoulder, my wrist, nothing that won't heal." "Emily." His voice dropped even lower. "Are they treating you like they don't know who you are, or like they know exactly who you are?" And there it was the question. The one she'd been turning over since the street corner. Victor had cut straight to it in 11 words, because Victor had spent his whole life around men who did bad things and learned to tell the difference between carelessness and intent. "I don't know yet," Emily said, honestly. "But Victor, I've been investigating this department for 8 months. These 2 officers are at the center of my file, out of the whole county." The silence on the line stretched. It's not a coincidence, Victor said. Emily said, I don't think it is. She heard him breathe out slowly. She heard faintly other voices in the background go quiet as if the room he was in had just realized something was wrong and turned to look at him. Oh, she could picture it. She'd been in that clubhouse once. Years ago, at Michael's memorial, surrounded by big-weathered men who'd stood in a line to shake her hand, and every single one of whom had told her the same thing. Anything you ever need. She'd never taken them up on it. Till now, Victor said, and his voice had gone very calm, of calm that isn't the absence of anger, but the harnessing of it. I want you to listen to me carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is the most important thing you'll hear tonight. I'm listening. You are going to hang up this phone, and you are going to go sit back down in that cell, and you are not going to say one more word to a single person in that building. A story, not a threat, not your name, nothing. You give them silence. Victor, I'm not finished. You give them silence because right now they think you're alone. A man who thinks his victim is alone gets careless. He writes the report. He signs it. He commits himself. A pause. The worst thing you could do tonight is make them cautious. Let them keep thinking exactly what they thought when they looked at you on that street. Emily closed her eyes. I'm powerless, she said. That you're powerless, Victor agreed. It's the most dangerous mistake a man can make, and they already made it. Take it away from them. Something in Emily's chest, something that had been holding itself rigid since the moment Holloway's hand closed around her wrist, suddenly loosened. Just a little. Just enough for her to feel how tired she was. Enough for her eyes to sting. Michael always said you were the smart one, she said. Said a lot of things about me, and most of them weren't that nice. She could hear, unbelievably, the ghost of a smile in his voice. Then it was gone. Emily, I'm going to ask you one more question, and I need the true answer. A brave one, ask it. Ask it. Are you afraid? And there, phone, at a payphone in a hallway of a building full of men who wanted her small and quiet and gone. Federal investigator, 20 years, who'd stared down killers across steel tables and never once blinked told the truth. Yes, she said. I'm afraid. Not of them. I'm afraid of what I'm going to find when I finally see the whole thing. I've had my hand on the edge of this for 8 months. Victor, and every time I get close, someone disappears. They've pulled me into it, and part of me thinks that's because I'm close. Part of me is terrified of what close actually means. The line was quiet. Then Victor Reynolds said the thing that would carry her through everything that came next, through the courtroom, the reopened files, through the faces of the victims who'd suffered in silence for years, all of it. Then let me tell you what Michael made us promise, he said. He didn't ask us to protect you because you were weak. He asked us to protect you because you were the strongest person he'd ever met, and he knew a day might come when even the strongest person needs somebody standing behind them so they don't have to face the dark alone. A pause. That day is today, Emily. You are not alone in that building anymore. You haven't been since the second you dialed. Emily gripped the phone. In the hall, she heard a door open. She heard Holloway's voice, and the sound of paper, a report being carried to a desk. A report. The one with her name on it. The one about to be signed. Getting it now, she said quietly. I can hear them. Good, said Victor. Let them finish. Let them sign their names. And Emily? Yeah, remember every second of tonight. Words they used. The way they looked at you. The way they laughed. Because when this is over, and it is going to be over, I promise you that the whole world is going to want to know exactly how it started. I remember all of it already, Emily said. Word. Of course you do, that ghost of a smile again. Your family, we don't forget either. The young officer appeared at the end of the hall. He said, but he said it softly, and he didn't quite meet her eyes. And Emily filed that away too. One man, in this building whose conscience wasn't fully asleep yet. I have to go, she told Victor. Go sit down. Say no. Already moving. The line went dead. Emily set the phone down gently on its cradle. She turned. The young officer took her arm carefully, like the others, and walked her back toward the cell. And as she walked, she thought about the two men down the hall. At a desk, signing their names to a lie about a woman they decided didn't matter. About the file on her desk, 8 months deep, full of shadows she'd never been able to name. She thought about the man whose story ended in a question mark, about the promise a dying man had made. His brothers take care of Emily. She's family, and how those men had waited years, patient and silent for the one night she'd finally need it. Door closed behind her. Emily Carter sat down on the cold bench, folded her aching hands in her lap, and did exactly what Victor had told her to do. She said nothing. She just sat there, quiet, in a building full of people who thought they'd caught a helpless woman. And she waited for the men who never abandoned family to finish what those officers had so foolishly started. The report was signed at 9:47 that night. Emily didn't see it happen. She heard it, the scrape of a chair, the tap of a pen against a desk, all saying, "Just sign it, man. She's not going anywhere." And then the small sound of a signature going down on paper. She'd been listening for it, the way a woman listens for a door to lock. When it came, she didn't feel fear. She felt something close, because a signed lie is not a threat. A signed lie is a leash, and two men had just handed her the other end of it. She counted the hours by the changing voices in the hallway. She'd learned that in 20 years, you don't need a clock if you learn the rhythm of a building. Change came around 11, new voices, a woman's briefly. Then the building settled in that thin, slow quiet that jails get after midnight, when the only people awake are the ones with nowhere else to be. Around 1 a.m, the young officer came back. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood outside the bars with a paper cup of water, looking at her the way a man looks at a problem he wishes somebody else had been handed. "Roppy, you didn't drink the water they left you," he said finally. "I don't drink anything I didn't watch get poured," Emily said. "No offense to you personally." He almost smiled. Then he didn't. He crouched down so they were level, and he lowered his voice, and Emily's whole body went quietly alert. A man doesn't lower his voice in an empty jail unless he's about to say something he's not supposed to. "The report," he said. "Did you? It says you resisted. It says you refused to identify yourself." He turned the paper cup slowly in his hands. "I was at the front desk when they brought you in. You told the sergeant your badge number. You said it out loud. Him to open the wallet." He stopped. There was a wallet. Emily said nothing. She just watched him. "I've been here 14 months, he said. "I've learned to keep my head down and not ask questions. There's stuff in this department there's stuff I don't look at too hard. Every time somebody looks at it too hard, they end up transferred, written up, or worse." He swallowed. "There was a guy before me. Everybody said he was a troublemaker. Asked too many questions. One day he just stopped showing up. Nobody talks about him." Emily's heart did something sharp and quiet in her chest. Reyes, that was the name. That was the file on her desk. The one that ended in a question mark. The man who stopped answering his phone. She'd had a last name and a shadow and nothing else for 8 months. And here it was, falling out of the mouth of a nervous kid at 1 a.m, like it was nothing. Her face perfectly still. "What's your name?" she asked him. "Officer Delgado. Marcus." "Marcus." She leaned forward. "Oh, careful, the way you move toward something that might bolt. You already know what you saw at that desk. You already know what's in that report. The question left is whether you're a man who saw it and stayed quiet, or a man who saw it and did something." Delgado stood up fast. She'd touched something hot. "I can't," he said. "A kid. I can't. I'm not asking you to do anything tonight," Emily said. I'm asking you to remember that this conversation happened. Just remember it. There's going to come a day, and it's coming sooner than anyone in this building thinks, when somebody asks you what you saw at that front desk. And on that day, you get to choose which kind of man you are. All I want from you." He stared at her. Then he set the paper cup down on the floor, just inside the bars, and he walked away without another word. Emily looked at the cup. She didn't drink it, but she understood what it meant. It meant that even here, even in the deepest part of the machine, there was one hairline crack, and She'd spent her whole career learning that a machine doesn't need to shatter. Oh, it only needs one crack in the right place, and then all the pressure inside it does the rest. Other pen, she leaned her head back against the cinder block and let herself think about Victor, already moving. She didn't know what that meant. Hers. Exactly. She hadn't asked. That was the strange thing about the trust Michael had built with those men. Over all those years, she didn't have to know the mechanism. She only had to know it was real. And 30 miles away, in a low building at the end of a gravel road, it was very real. The phones had hung up the phone and stood in the middle of a room that had gone dead silent. 7 men were looking at him. He'd been around each of them for the better part of 2 decades, and he could feel the temperature in the room climbing just from the look on his face. It was Emily, he said. Michael's Emily. Something moved through the room. A leaning in. They got her in a cell, Victor said. 2 cops stopped her on the street for nothing. Put her up, cuffed her, and they're writing a report right now saying she resisted. She didn't. He let that sit. And here's the part I need every one of you to hear before anybody's blood gets up. She's been investigating that same department for 8 months. 2 cops are at the center of her case. A younger man near the door, barely 25, all shoulders and heat pushed off the wall. Then let's go get her, he said. Tonight. Sit down, Tommy. Victor put hands on Michael's wife. I said, sit down. Tommy sat. His jaw was working, and his hands were opening and closing. And Victor understood exactly what he was feeling because Victor was feeling it too. Underneath in the place, he'd spent 30 years learning to keep chained. You want to go kick a door down, whatever said, and he said it to the whole room, not just to Tommy, I know. Every one of us wants to. That's the easy thing. That's the thing they'd expect cause. You know what happens if 7 of us roll up on that station tonight? Gives them the story. We become the story. Big scary bikers show up making threats. And just like that, Emily's not a federal investigator who got railroaded. Colonel's widow, whose gang came to intimidate cops. That's the headline they'd write. That's the headline they'd pray for. Tommy looked down. They didn't ask us to protect her with our fists. Victor said. His voice changed, went lower, went to the place that made even Tommy go still. He asked us to protect her. There's a difference. And if you don't understand the difference, you don't understand what he was. He looked around the room. So no, we're not going to the station. We're going to do something a lot harder, a lot worse for those men than anything we could do with our hands. He turned to a man sitting quietly at the back, older, gray at the temples, glasses pushed up on his forehead, laptop already open in front of him, like he'd known this was coming. Daniel, she said, cameras, 3 of them on the corner, and a witness with a phone. I want every second of it. Here's somebody in that building realizes those cameras exist and finds a reason to lose them. Daniel Brooks was already typing. Municipal cameras run through the county's own system, he said, looking up, which is a problem, because that's the same system that keeps eating her complaints. Pharmacy on that corner runs its own, private, their network. He glanced up over his glasses. Pharmacy I'm thinking of, that footage lives on a box in a back office and nobody's looked at it in years. Nobody even remembers its recording. How fast? Give me till morning. You've got till morning, Victor said. Then, to another man, lean, weathered, a former Army medic named Samuel Hayes, who'd seen enough of the world to have very few illusions left about it. Sam. Before this, name of Reyes. Emily's got a file on him that dead ends. They'd vanished. I want to know if he's alive, and if he is, I want to know why he stopped talking. Sam nodded slowly. Don't stop talking. For no reason, he said. Stop talking because somebody made talking cost more than silence. Then find out what it cost him. And to the last man he needed big, quiet, a road captain named Richard Walker who'd spent 30 years reading people at gas stations and truck stops and knew how to make a stranger trust him inside of 5 minutes. Richard, that witness, the woman who filmed it. Emily said she kept recording even after the cop told her to move. A brave woman and a scared one. She's going to wake up tomorrow wondering if she should delete it. I need you to find her before she does. Richard tilted his head. How do I find a woman I've never seen from a street I wasn't on? Victor almost smiled. Same way you find anybody, he said. You go stand on that corner tomorrow morning and you talk to people. They saw her. Somebody always sees somebody. The room had changed. The heat was still there. Victor could feel it, but it had a shape now, a direction. And that was the whole trick, the thing Michael had understood better than any of them. Rage without a plan burns the man who carries it, but rage with a plan is just fuel. Everybody understand what we're doing? Victor said. We looked up. We're building a case. We're building a case, Victor agreed. Quietly, patiently, the way Michael would have. And when it's ready, we're not going to the same department that's been burying everything. We're going to hand it to somebody who can't be bought. He looked at each of them. That's later. Tonight, one job. Everybody go slow. Everybody go quiet. And nobody does anything that makes those two cops nervous. Right now, they think they beat a helpless woman and got away with it. The most useful thing in the world. And I don't want a single one of you disturbing it. They moved. 5:40 the next morning, while Emily was still sitting awake in her cell. Psst, called Victor's phone. Tell me, Victor said. Got it. Daniel's voice was careful, controlled. This of a man who'd found something bigger than he'd gone looking for. Pharmacy camera, clean angle on the whole corner. You can see her raise her hands. You can see her keep them up. You can see the young cop grab her wrist and twist it behind her before she'd moved an inch. A pause. She's telling the truth about all of it. She narrated her own arrest. You can read her lips. She's saying, I am not resisting over and over. Good. That's not the part I called about. Victor's grip tightened on the phone. Then what's the part? The angle catches the cruiser, Daniel said slowly. They even walked over to her, and there's a laptop mounted in the cruiser, the screen's facing the camera, and I ran it through some cleanup. He stopped. They had her file open before they got out of the car. A photo of her on the screen. They knew who she was before they said one word to her. The room went very quiet. Victor closed his eyes. He'd suspected it. Emily had suspected it. But suspecting a thing and seeing it on a screen were two different animals entirely. They didn't stumble onto her. Victor said no. Daniel said, they sent them. Somebody pulled her file, put her photo in that cruiser, and pointed them at that corner. This wasn't two cops having a bad day. This was an operation, which meant the man giving the orders wasn't in that cruiser at all. How does it go? Victor said quietly. It wasn't really a question. Don't know yet, Daniel said. But you don't pull a federal investigator's file and stage an arrest with two street cops. That's not a decision a sergeant makes. A decision somebody with a lot to lose makes. Victor stood in the gray early light with the phone against his ear and thought about the woman in that cell, the woman who'd called him not for rescue but for witness. The woman who'd spent 8 months walking straight toward a thing that had already swallowed at least one man whole. About Michael, thin and gray at the end, gripping his hand and saying, take care of Emily, she doesn't know how to ask for help. She never learned how. Daniel, he said, that footage. How many copies exist right now? 1. On my machine. Make 3 more. Them somewhere, I can't find them if somebody makes me tell them where they are. Victor's voice was flat and calm and absolutely cold. Because the second these people find out this footage exists, they're going to want it gone. And they are going to come looking for the person who has it. Who has it needs to be 4 people I've never named out loud, already on it. Victor hung up. 30 miles away at 6:15 in the morning, heard the cell door unlock. As a different officer, older, tired, indifferent, and he told her she was being released. Explanation, no apology, just a form to sign and a plastic bag with her old leather bag and her black wallet inside it. As Emily checked the wallet, first thing, right there at the desk, and her federal credentials were exactly where they'd been the whole time. She held them up. These were in here the entire time, she said. Enough for the room. The whole time. Officer Holloway told the sergeant I had no identification. That was a lie. And it's on your cameras and it's on his report. The tired officer didn't even look up. Up with the desk, ma'am. Oh, I'm going to take it up with a lot of people, Emily said. And she slid the credentials into her pocket and she walked out of that building into the gray morning air with her shoulders still aching and her wrists still raw, and something bright and terrible burning steady in her chest. Herbert, she got 2 blocks before the truck pulled up beside her. Old pickup, faded blue, rust at the wheel wells. Arrow came down, and behind it was a big man with gray at his temples and eyes she recognized from a memorial years ago, even though she'd only met him once. Herbert, she knew it before he said a word. Victor, he said gently. Victor sent me. You want to ride, Victor? You want to keep walking on a hurt shoulder to prove you can? Emily stopped, her own surprise. Her eyes filled not from fear, not from pain, but from the simple, staggering fact of it. Somebody had come. Somebody had been out here in the dark, their dawn waiting for her. She'd spent her whole life being the person who came for other people, and she had forgotten, genuinely forgotten, what it felt like to have someone come for her. Well, I'll take the ride, rather, she said, and her voice cracked on it, just slightly, and Richard pretended not to notice its own kind of kindness. She got in. The truck smelled like coffee and old vinyl. There was a second cup in the holder, steam still coming off it. And Richard nodded at it. Poured it myself, if that matters, he said. Mentioned, you've got a rule about that. Emily let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something that had been sitting on her chest since Holloway's hand closed around her wrist 12 hours ago. Coffee. He'd tell you that already, she said. There. He tells us everything that matters, Richard said. On the truck back onto the road. That's how we've stayed out of trouble for 30 years, while everybody swore we were the trouble. They drove in silence for a minute, wrapped both hands around the cup and let the warmth sink into her fingers, and she watched the town go by, and she made herself say the thing out loud, because she'd learned a long time ago that the things you don't say out loud are the ones that eat you. They knew who I was, she said, didn't they? Before they stopped me, Richard's hands didn't move on the wheel. Well, something in his silence answered before he did. Victor was going to tell you himself, he said finally. Yeah. Daniel pulled the pharmacy footage this morning. Laptop was up before they got out of the car. Your photo. They knew exactly who they were grabbing. Emily had expected it. She'd known it in her gut since the street corner. She'd said it to Victor on the phone. But hearing it confirmed hearing that there was a picture of it, a recording, a screen with her own face on it inside their cruiser, before they'd said a single word to her landed in her chest like a physical thing. And for a moment she couldn't speak, because it meant she'd been right. Fear she'd tried to name to Victor. At that payphone, I'm afraid of what I'm going to find was pointed at something real. That's not a street cop's decision, she said quietly. What Daniel said. Somebody up the chain pulled my who knew how close I was getting. She stared out the window, and her mind was moving fast now, faster than the pain, faster than the fear, running the file in her head, the vanished complaints, rewritten reports, the witnesses who went silent, the man named Reyes who stopped answering his phone. Herbert, this isn't 2 dirty cops with a widow to bully. This is somebody protecting themselves. This is somebody who found out a federal investigator was 3 weeks from the truth and decided to find out what she knew or scare her off before she could finish. Victor figured the same, Richard said. Nobody kicked a door down last night, much as some of the younger ones wanted to. Emily turned to look at him. To come, she said. Every one of them, Richard said, and there was something in his voice, some old ache. Me about took the door off the hinges. Victor stopped him. The worst thing we could do was make those men nervous. Said as long as they think they beat a helpless woman and walked away clean, keep being sloppy, and sloppy men leave evidence. He glanced at her. He said you'd understand that better than any of us. I do, Emily said. And she did. It was exactly what she'd have said herself. It was, in fact, precisely why she hadn't called a lawyer. The most dangerous thing I have right now is that they think I'm powerless. That's almost word for word what he said. Then Victor and I are going to get along fine, Emily said. Off the main road, onto gravel, and Emily saw the low building at the end of it, and she saw the men standing outside it, 5, 6 of them, turning to watch the truck come up the drive. Weathered men the whole world had been taught to fear, and every single one of them, she understood as the truck rolled to a stop, Us here because a dying man had asked them to be years ago, and not one of them had forgotten. The truck stopped. Nobody moved to open her door for her, and she was grateful for it. They understood, being told that she was not a woman who needed doors opened. She opened it herself. She stepped out onto the gravel, and Victor Reynolds came out of the building and crossed the yard toward her up a few feet away. And he looked at her for a long moment. At the shoulders, she was holding a little stiff, but the raw marks on her wrists, at the exhaustion under her eyes and the steel behind it. And whatever he saw, it made his jaw tighten. Michael would have torn that town apart, Victor said quietly. Michael would have been wrong to, Emily said. Victor's mouth moved, almost a smile. Yeah, he said. He would have. He always led with his heart. You lead with your head. He used to say that was the difference between you and that it was the only reason he wasn't dead 10 years sooner. He paused. Inside, Emily. There's something you need to see. I'll tell you right now. Before you look at it, it's worse than you think. It's also the first solid thing anybody's ever had on these people. And you're the one who's going to know what to do with it. Emily looked past him, her way, at the men filing back inside, at the world she'd kept at arm's length for so many years because she'd been too proud, or too stubborn, or too afraid to spend the one promise she'd been carrying. About Delgado and his paper cup of water. About the name Reyes falling out of the dark at 1 a.m. About a screen with her own face on it inside a cruiser, man, the one she couldn't see yet, the one at the top of it, all who'd put it there. Emily said, and she walked in. The footage was worse than she thought. Daniel had it cued on the laptop, and he turned the screen toward her without a word. Watched herself raise her hands on that street corner. She watched herself keep them up. She watched Holloway grab her wrist and twist it before she'd moved an inch. And she watched her own mouth forming the words she remembered, saying, I am not resisting. I am not resisting. And it was strange watching yourself be right in a way no one had believed at the time. That wasn't the part that made her go cold. Run it back, she said. They got out of the car. The cruiser. Daniel dragged it back. And there it was, the laptop mounted in the cruiser, the screen angled just enough. Her own face frozen on it in a photo she recognized as her federal personnel photo, and that lived in a secure system, the one a street cop had no reason to be able to pull, no way to pull without help. Emily stared at it for a long time. It doesn't come from a traffic database, she said quietly. That's an internal file. Somebody with real access pulled that and pushed it down to a patrol laptop. She looked up at Daniel. Where it came from? The account that accessed it? Not from the video, Daniel said. But if that photo moved through their system logged it. Everything logs. The question is whether the log still exists or whether somebody already cleaned it. They clean everything, Emily said. Whole pattern. Complaints, reports, witnesses. They're very good at cleaning. She set her jaw. But they're good at cleaning the things they know to look for. Laptops access log the morning of a random arrest. Nobody thinks to scrub that. It's too small. It's beneath them. Victor had been standing at the edge of the room, arms folded, watching her work. Now he spoke. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. Watch somebody realize they left a door open. 20 years of it, Emily said. The big crimes are always covered. It's the small, careless things that hang them. Parking receipt. A phone that pinged the wrong tower. Log nobody thought mattered. She turned back to the screen. Somebody in that department made one careless decision. They used the real system to pull my file instead of doing it the hard, quiet way. And that decision is going to unspool the whole thing. Sam Hayes came in through the side door then. The look on his face stopped the room. He'd been gone since before dawn. Emily could chasing the name Reyes, and Emily could tell from the set of his shoulders that he'd found something, that it hadn't been good. He's alive, Sam said. Orders. Emily let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Reyes is alive, Sam said again, lowering himself into a chair like the news had cost him something to carry. Holding it together, but alive. Lives 4 counties over now. Heard his number 3 times. Took me most of the morning. and a lot of talking to a lot of nervous people to get a man to even admit he knew where he was. He looked at Emily. I finally got him on the phone and said the word Holloway. He went so quiet I thought the line dropped. What did he say? Emily asked. First, nothing. Then he said, and I'm quoting him, a family. I already paid for this once. I'm not paying it again. Sam rubbed his face. This is a man who was on the job, a cop, and he's more scared of his own old department than he'd be of anything on my side of the world. Tells you what we're dealing with. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, did he say what he paid? He said he saw something he wasn't supposed to. Told a report about it. Internal. By the book. Sam's jaw worked. And within a month, his report was gone from the system like it never existed. He was written up for 3 things he swore he never did. And a man came to his house, not in uniform, just a man, and told him his wife drove a real pretty route to work every morning, and it'd be a shame if that ever changed. Sam looked up. He quit. Rand went quiet. And he's been quiet for 2 years. He told me straight out he intends to stay that way. The room was silent. Emily felt something move through her that she recognized the old fury she'd learned long ago to keep pointed and useful instead of loud. Because she knew that story. She had a version of it on her desk. Dead ended at a question mark. And now the question mark had a voice and a family and a pretty route to work that a stranger had threatened. He witnessed something, she said, 2 years ago. Something big enough that they threatened his wife to bury it. Whatever it was, it's the same rod I've been chasing. She looked at Victor. Reyes isn't a dead end. Reyes is the beginning. He saw the thing they're all protecting. I can get him to say it. He won't, Sam said flatly. I'm telling you. That man is done. You didn't hear his voice. He's not scared. He's broken. They took something out of him. He'll never testify. And Emily said, the thing that changed the whole shape of the room. Doesn't have to testify, she said. Not yet. He just has to tell me what he saw. Off the record one time, so I know what I'm looking for. Right now, I'm searching a haystack for a needle I can't describe. If Reyes tells me what the needle looks like, I'll find it myself, and he never has to say a word in public. Sam stared at her. You'd protect him, he said slowly, even though he's the one witness who could crack this open. Let him stay hidden. I don't burn people to win, Emily said, and her voice was quiet and absolute. That's the difference between me and them. They use people up and throw them away. I'm not going to do the same thing to Reyes just because it's convenient. If he tells me what he saw, that's a gift, and I'll carry it the rest of the way alone. She paused. Tell him that, Sam. Word for word. Tell him the Fed doesn't want his name. Turns his eyes one time, in the dark, and then he can disappear forever, and she'll make sure nobody ever knows he spoke. Sam looked at her for a long moment. Slowly, he nodded. That, he said, I can sell to him. He might believe. He stood. Give me a day. He left. Richard Walker came in, almost as he went out, and Richard was smiling, the first real smile Emily had seen in that building. And behind him, listeners hesitating in the doorway, was a young woman clutching her phone against her chest like a shield. Her? Richard said. This is Angela. She's the one who filmed your arrest. Emily stood up. The young woman, Angela, looked terrified. She looked like she'd been up all night arguing with herself. She looked, Emily thought, exactly the way a decent person looks when they've done a brave thing and haven't yet decided whether they're going to be brave enough to see it through. Almost deleted it, Angela blurted out, before anyone could say anything. Last night, I had my thumb on it. I filmed a cop, and I thought I've got a lease. A job. I don't want cops knowing my face. Who am I to? And then this man, she gestured at Richard, found me at the coffee place this morning. And he didn't threaten me or anything. He just asked if I'd seen something. And did I want to talk about it? I don't even know why I said yes. You said yes, Emily said gently. Because you saw something wrong happen, and it's been sitting on your chest ever since, and it wouldn't let you delete it. That's not weakness. That's the best part of you refusing to be quiet. Angela's eyes filled. He twisted your arm, she said. You had your hands up. You had your hands up, and he twisted your arm, and you never fought back. You just kept talking, real calm, and I couldn't hear what you were saying, but you never stopped. I was saying I wasn't resisting, Emily said. over and over so there'd be a record. So somebody watching someday would know. She looked at the phone in Angela's hands. There was somebody watching. There was you. Angela looked down at the phone. She said, "The video. I want a copy," Emily said. "Better. You keep the original. You keep it somewhere safe. There. And you don't delete it no matter what, and you tell no one you have it." "Can you do that?" Angela nodded, and then she said the thing that made Emily's whole body go still. "Then the arrest," she said. I got there before it started. I was already filming because she flushed, because those two cops, everybody in my neighborhood knows those two cops. Away in Cole. They shake people down. Everybody knows. They took cash off my cousin last year and dared him to report it. And so when I saw them get out of that cruiser, I started filming on instinct. They even reached you." She swallowed, and I got them talking. "They're before you." When they didn't know and anybody was listening, the room had gone completely silent. Emily heard her own heartbeat. "Angela," she said, very carefully, very evenly, the way you'd speak to keep someone from spooking. "They say." Angela's hands were shaking now. Up the video. She scrubbed back, past the arrest, in the beginning, and she turned up the volume and she held the phone out. And through the tinny speaker, faint but clear, came Cole's voice. From across the street on a stranger's phone, saying words that would end 2 careers and a great deal more. Holloway's voice. "Sarge sent the photo himself. Federal. Been sniffing around our files for months. So what do we do with the Fed?" "We do what the Sarge said. We bring her in, we sit her down, we find out how much she's got, and we make it real clear that a woman all alone in this town should think hard about her next move. And if she pushes, she won't. Her little bag, walking around by herself. Daddy's got her back. She's nothing." The video kept playing. Nobody in the room was listening anymore, because everybody had heard the only 3 words that mattered. Serge sent the photo. Emily sat down slowly. There it was. Not inference, not a pattern, not a shadow. A confession, and out loud by the men themselves, captured by a frightened young woman who'd almost deleted it. The sergeant had sent the photo. The sergeant had given the order. The whole thing had come down from above, and the 2 officers on the street had been nothing but the hands. "Sergeant," Victor said quietly. "The sergeant," Emily echoed. "Ratters." And then, because her mind was already 3 moves ahead, the sergeant doesn't pull a federal file either. It follows orders same as they do. He's a link in a chain of it. She looked up. "This goes higher than a sergeant." "How do you know?" "Because a sergeant who pulls a Fed's file on his own authority is a man committing career suicide," Emily said. "Does that alone. Nobody takes that risk unless somebody above him made it safe, unless somebody above him said, 'Do this, and I'll cover you.'" Ernst sent the photo because somebody told the sergeant to. She stared at the frozen screen. "Area saw something 2 years ago. The sergeant sent 2 cops after me 3 weeks before I finished. These aren't 2 crimes. They're the same crime, protecting the same person, and it's not the sergeant, and it's not Holloway, and it's not Cole. Whatever they're all so afraid of, that a cop would rather run 4 counties away than say a name out loud." The room absorbed that. Tommy, the young one, the one who'd wanted to kick the door down, said what everyone was thinking. "Who is it?" "I don't know yet," Emily said, "but I know how to find out." She turned to Daniel. "Access log. The one nobody thought to scrub. The sergeant pulled my photo. His account touched my file. A timestamp is right there. And I'd bet money the sergeant's not smart enough to have used somebody else's login. Men like him never think they'll get caught." She stood up. "Well, get me into that log, Daniel, and I'll show you the exact minute the order came down. Then we follow it up. 1 link at a time." Daniel was already typing. "Any system. It's not connected to anything I can reach from the outside. Into that log, somebody has to pull it from inside the building." The room went quiet again, because they all understood what that meant. Somebody inside, with a login and a conscience and a reason to risk everything. And Emily thought of a nervous young officer crouching outside her cell at 1 in the morning, holding a paper cup of water in his hands, saying there was a wallet. "I might know somebody," she said slowly. Victor's eyes sharpened. I'd a kid. Delgado. He's been there 14 months and he's already sick of what he's seeing. He came to my cell in the middle of the night just to tell me he knew the report was a lie. He's scared he's got a kid, but he's not asleep yet. He's right at the edge. She thought about it. If I ask him to steal something, he'll run. But if I ask him to just look at one thing, log, one time, and tell me Tweety sees a man like that might do it, because the not doing is already killing him. That's a hell of a risk to put on a stranger, Richard said quietly. What they did to Reyes. If they catch this kid pulling a log on your file, I know exactly what they'll do, Emily said. And her voice was low and fierce, which is why I'm not going to let them catch him. He looks, he remembers. He tells me one number of the account that pulled my file. He doesn't print anything, doesn't email anything, doesn't leave a trace. He just looks and he walks away, and nobody ever knows he looked. She met Richard's eyes. I've spent 20 years learning how to protect the people who helped me. Lost that fight exactly once, early on, and a man died. I have never lost it again. I am not going to lose Delgado. The room was silent, and in that silence, Emily understood something about the men around her. They weren't studying her plan. They were studying her, and what she saw in their faces was recognition, the same thing they must have seen in Michael all those years ago. A person who wanted to win, a person who wanted to do it right, even when right was harder, even when right meant carrying more weight yourself so that no one else had to. Victor pushed off the wall. Michael used to say something, he said. Others. He said the measure of a person isn't how hard they hit. It's who they refused to sacrifice on the way to winning. He looked at her. At corners, he said you were the only person he ever met who'd rather lose clean than win dirty. I'll be honest, Emily, for 20 years I thought that was just a man being sweet about his wife. He paused. I don't think that anymore. Emily didn't trust her voice for a second. About me? She managed. He talked about you every single time we saw him, Victor said quietly. Right up to the end. The last real conversation I had with him. He wasn't scared of dying. He was scared of leaving you to fight the world alone, because he knew you'd never ask anybody for help. Victor's jaw tightened. Yeah, he made us promise. He said, she'll try to do it all herself. She'll think that's strength. Don't let her. When the day comes, don't let her be alone. He looked around the room. This is the day, and she's not alone. Not for one more minute of it. Something broke loose in Emily's chest. Something she'd been holding since a hospital hallway years ago. Something she'd carried alone through every hard night since. Pressed her lips together and breathed through the way she'd breathed through the cuffs, the way she'd breathed through the shoulder. She let it settle, and she nodded. All right, she said. Her voice was steady again. Then here's what we do. Gets Reyes to tell me what he saw off the record, so I know what I'm looking for. Angela keeps the original video safe and tells no one. Daniel makes 4 more copies of everything and buries them where nobody can find them. I go find Delgado quietly, away from the building, and I ask him to do one small brave thing. She looked at each of them. Nobody does anything that makes those men upstairs feel the ground move. They think it worked. They think they scared a helpless woman and she went home quiet. Every day they believe that is a day they get sloppier. Let them believe it as long as we possibly can. And when we can't anymore, Tommy asked. Emily's eyes went hard. Then we don't take it to their department, she said. We don't take it to the county. We take it somewhere they can't reach, somewhere with no favors owed and no complaints to bury and no strangers to send to a man's house to threaten his wife. She thought of the courtroom she could already see coming, fence away full of people who'd waited years. We take it to the one place where the only thing that matters is what's true. And we make sure that by the time we walk in there, the truth is so heavy and so complete that not one of them can lift a finger to stop it. Victor looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something Emily didn't expect. He crossed the room and he held out his hand, not to shake it, but palm up, and the way you offer something rather than take it. Well, because brothers made him a promise, Victor said. I want you to hear it from me out loud so you never doubt it again. We're not helping you because you're his widow. We started because of that. We're staying because of you. Because in one night, You've shown every man in this room what he saw in you. He paused. Borrowing our loyalty, Emily. You've earned your own. Emily looked at his open hand. Then she put hers in it, her wrist still raw, her grip still strong, and she gripped it hard. Let's go get them, she said. All of them. All the way to the top. Let's do it so clean that when it's over, not one person can say we did it anyway but right. Outside, it was climbing toward noon, and 30 miles away, in a building that still thought it won, a sergeant sat at a desk near a log he didn't know was about to be read. Of him, in an office with his name on the door, a man who'd been protected for a very long time went about his morning with no idea at all that a widow he'd tried to break had just gathered around herself the one thing his money and his fear had never been able to buy. And she was coming. She found Delgado 2 days later, in the parking lot of a grocery store 4 blocks from his apartment. She didn't approach him at the station. She'd waited, watched his rhythm the way she'd once watched suspects not to trap him. To be sure, she could speak to him where no one from that building would ever see. She was standing by his car when his shift ended, and she watched him spot her. She watched the fear jump into his face, and she raised both hands, palms open, the same way she had on the street corner. "I'm not here to cause you trouble," she said. "I just want to talk. 2 minutes, then I walk away, and you never have to see me again." Delgado looked around the lot. "Be here. If somebody sees you talking to me, nobody's going to see," Emily said. "I picked this spot for a reason. There's no camera on this corner." They checked. "You think I'd do that to you?" That stopped him. Look at her differently then, like it had just occurred to him that she'd taken more care with his safety in 2 minutes than his own department had taken in 14 months. "You remember what I told you," Emily said. "In the cell. I said there'd come a day when somebody asked you what you saw at that front desk." "A little. That day's not coming. It's here." She kept her voice gentle. "I'm not asking you to testify. I'm not asking you to sign anything. I'm asking you to put your name on one single piece of paper." "Then, what are you asking?" "I'm asking you to look at one thing," Emily said, "one time, and tell me a number." She explained it. Really, carefully, the access log, the account that had pulled her federal file the morning of her arrest. He wouldn't print anything, wouldn't email anything, or wouldn't copy anything, wouldn't leave a single fingerprint. What? He'd open a screen he had every right to open. He'd read one line. He'd remember one string of numbers, and he'd close it. And then he'd walk away. And if it ever came apart, look, there'd be nothing at all tying him to it. Joe listened with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "They threatened Ray's wife," he said finally. "You know that? That's a story everybody whispers. That's why nobody ever talks." "I know," Emily said. "Dr. Reyes." Delgado's head came up. "He's alive?" "He's alive." "Scared, hidden? 4 counties away. Alive." "And you know what he told me?" She stepped closer. "His one regret isn't that he ran. It's that he ran alone. He never told anyone what he saw, so it all just sat there and rotted. And 2 years later, they're doing the same thing to somebody else to me because nobody stopped them the first time." She held his eyes. "A kid, Marcus, I know. So did Reyes. And every day you stay quiet, you're teaching yourself that quiet is what keeps your kids safe. But it doesn't. It just means when they come for your kids someday, there'll be nobody left who ever learned how to say no." Delgado's jaw worked. Eyes were wet. "One number," he said. "One number." He looked at the sky for a long moment. Then he looked back at her, and something in his face had settled the thing she'd seen begin to crack in the middle of the night, only all the way open. "There's a badge number they'd never think to check," he said quietly. "The system logs which terminal pulled a file, not just the account terminal." He swallowed. "The morning you got arrested, only one terminal in the whole building has clearance to reach a federal database. It's in the sergeant's office, and only 2 people have the login for it." Emily went very still. "Oh," she said. "Sergeant Boyd," Delgado said, "and Boyd's boss. And Boyd reports to." He looked at her. "Lieutenant Hartley." The name landed in Emily's chest like a stone dropped in deep water. Hartley. She knew that name. She'd seen it a dozen times in her file. always at the edges, always just adjacent to something that had gone wrong. They're quite at the center of anything. A lieutenant with a clean record and a lot of commendations and a strange, consistent habit of being the officer who signed off on the reports that later turned out to be false. She'd flagged him twice and both times talked herself out of it. Because the evidence was circumstantial, because he was decorated as a man that seniors surely wouldn't. That's the one, she said softly. Top of it. I've been staring at his name for 8 months, and I kept telling myself it couldn't be him because he was too high up to be that dirty. That's exactly why it's him, Delgado said. There you go. The cleaner your hands look, because you've got more people underneath you to do the dirty part. He paused. Boyd sends the photos. Boyd gives the orders to guys like Holloway and Cole. He doesn't decide anything. Boyd's scared of Hartley, same as everybody's scared of Boyd. Matter. And Hartley's at the top of it, and he never touches the bottom. His hands stay clean. Except the morning of my arrest, Emily said. But he had to pull a federal file. And a federal file is above Boyd's clearance. Delgado nodded slowly. But which means it wasn't Boyd who pulled it, Emily said. Her heart was pounding now. It was Hartley. Hartley had to do that part himself, because Boyd literally couldn't. Hartley touched the system with his own hands, because it was the one thing he couldn't push down the ladder. She looked at Delgado. That's the mistake. That's the careless thing. He spent years keeping his hands clean, and then he had to pull my file himself, and he left a log. You want the log, Delgado said. I want you to look at it, Emily said, and tell me whose login pulled my file that morning. And then you walk away and forget you ever saw me. Delgado was quiet for a long moment. All right, then he said, I don't have to look. I already know. That 2 days ago. I've been sick about it ever since. I came to your cell. He met her eyes. It was Hartley's login. There was his terminal. Time-stamped 6:52 that morning, about 40 minutes before they grabbed you. By accident, when I was pulling something else, and I couldn't unsee it, and I've been carrying it around ever since, not knowing what to do with it. His voice cracked. You're the first person I've told. You're the first person I trusted enough. Emily closed her eyes. She had it. She had all of it now. Hartley's login, Hartley's terminal, a timestamp, and a witness who'd seen it with his own eyes, a witness. She now understood she had to protect even more fiercely than she'd protected Reyes. As Delgado was inside, Delgado was exposed. Delgado had a kid. She said, listen to me very carefully. You are going to go home tonight, and you are going to act completely normal. You never told me this. We never talked. You keep going to work. You keep your head down. You do your job, and you wait. I'm not going to move on until I can do it in one strike. At once, so fast and so complete that he never gets the chance to figure out where it came from. If this breaks, it's going to break everywhere at once. And you're going to be just one anonymous cop in a building full of them. Nobody will ever know it started with you. And if it doesn't work, Delgado asked, if he wriggles out, men like him always wriggle out. Not this time, Emily said. This time it's not one thing. It's everything altogether. The video of the arrest, the audio of the officers saying the sergeant sent your photo, access log with Hartley's login, and Reyes, who's going to tell me what he saw 2 years ago. So I finally know what Hartley's been protecting all this time. One of those he beats. All of them at once in a place he can't reach. She shook her head. Ours. Sam got Reyes to talk the next night. Everything Sam driving 4 counties over. Sitting in a diner for 3 hours, promising over and over that the Fed didn't want his name, only his eyes one time in the dark. And finally, a corner booth with his back to the wall, Reyes told Emily over the phone the thing he'd been carrying for 2 years. As a man, Reyes said, his voice shaking, a guy who filed complaints, ones, documented ones, beatings, shakedowns, the whole thing. And he had proof, he had photos, he had witnesses. He was going to blow it all open. He stopped. And one night there was a call, a traffic stop that went bad, they said. And the man died. It was there for the paperwork after, and the paperwork didn't match. Paperwork said one thing and the scene said another. And I knew it wasn't what they said it was. Emily gripped the phone. There. You're saying they killed him. I'm saying the report Hartley signed was a lie, Reyes said. I'm saying a man who was about to expose them died in custody. A paperwork got written to make it clean, and Hartley signed it. And when I said the paperwork didn't match, that's when the man came to my house and talked about my wife's route to work. His voice broke. I've never said this out loud. 2 years. You're the first person. I'm telling you because that biker swore you'd never use my name. I won't, Emily said. I swear it on my husband's grave. Your name never comes up. Reyes, the man who died. I need his name. Just his name. Because if he had a family, that family has been living for 2 years thinking he died in some accident. His name was Curtis Ward, Reyes said. She was maybe 19. She stood outside that station for a month trying to get somebody to tell her what really happened to her father. And everybody just kept telling her it was an accident, and eventually she stopped coming. His voice was barely a whisper now. I still see her sometimes, in my head, standing out there in the cold. I said nothing. God forgive me, I said nothing. Emily was quiet for a long moment. They're saying something now, she said finally. In the dark. One time, and I'm going to carry it the rest of the way so you never have to. Reyes Curtis Ward's daughter, she's still out there. She's still got no answer. And when this breaks, she's finally going to get one. She paused. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. The whole reason any of this matters. The line was silent for a long time. Her name's Rachel, Reyes said. Finally, Rachel Ward. Last I knew she waited tables somewhere in town. If you find her, his voice cracked, tell her he didn't do anything wrong. Her daddy was the bravest man in that whole rotten building. He died because he wouldn't stop telling the truth. I'll tell her, Emily said. A word. The pieces came together fast after that. Confirmed. Through channels Emily didn't ask about, Curtis Ward's death 2 years ago had been officially ruled accidental. A report signed by Lieutenant Hartley. The case closed in record time with no external review. Richard found Rachel Ward waiting tables at a diner on the east side of town. And when Emily went to see her, not as an investigator, woman sitting down across a booth and told her that her father hadn't died in an accident, that he died because he wouldn't stop telling the truth. Ward put her face in her hands and cried in a way that told Emily she'd been waiting 2 years for anyone to finally say it wasn't her imagination. Everybody told me I was crazy, Rachel whispered. Everybody said I needed to accept it and move on. And I couldn't because I knew him. I knew he wasn't careless. And every single person with a badge looked me in the eye and lied to my face. You weren't crazy, Emily said. And she took the girl's hands across the table. You were right. You were right the whole time. And everyone who told you otherwise was protecting the man who did it. And I'm going to make them stand up in a courtroom and admit it. All of them. I promise you that. And so it was built not in a night, in a rush, but carefully for weeks. The way Michael would have wanted it, the way Emily had done it her whole career. Every piece verified twice. Every witness protected. Every copy buried in a place no one could reach. Oh, the audio. The access log with Hartley's login at 6:52 in the morning. Reyes's account given anonymously, pointing to the one crime under all the others, Miss Ward's real cause of death. And Rachel Ward, who when Emily gently asked, never pushing, always leaving the door open for her to say no, looked up with red eyes and said she would testify. She would say anything. She would stand in front of the whole world and say her father's name. 2 years of silence had nearly killed her, and she was done being quiet. Colorado. Emily took it all to the one place Hartley couldn't reach. Not the department. She took it through her own federal channels, the ones she'd been careful to keep clean. No local favor could touch to a prosecutor with no connection to that town and no reason to protect anyone in it. I laid it out piece by piece, and she watched the prosecutor's face change from professional skepticism to something harder and colder as the pattern assembled itself. And when she finished, the prosecutor looked at her for a long moment. You know what you've got here, the prosecutor said quietly. I know exactly what I've got, Emily said. This isn't two dirty cops. Corruption case that runs a lieutenant deep and a man dead at the bottom of it. But this is careers. This is prison. This is the kind of thing that breaks, brings a whole department down with it. The prosecutor set down the file. You understand that the moment I move on this, there's no going back. There are people in that town who will do a great deal to make sure it doesn't happen. They already did a great deal, Emily said. They arrested me on a lie. They threatened a man's wife. They killed Curtis Ward and told his daughter it was an accident. There's no line left for them to cross that they haven't already crossed. She leaned forward. I've spent 8 months and one very bad night getting this into a form that not one of them can touch. Everything's verified. Every witness who needs protecting is protected. Evidence exists in 4 places they'll never find. So no, there's no going back. There was never supposed to be. What was the whole point? The prosecutor looked at her. Come to me, she asked. You could have taken this a dozen places. Well, place it with bigger names. Why me? Because you don't owe anybody in that town a thing, Emily said. Because I asked around, and every single person said the same thing about you, that you can't be bought, you scare. Only kind of person I could bring this to. Everybody else, I'd have spent the whole time wondering whose hand was really on the scale. The prosecutor was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and pulled the file toward her. Partners. Then let's put Lieutenant Hartley in a courtroom, she said, and see how clean his hands look with the lights on. The indictments came down all at once, Tuesday morning, exactly the way Emily had planned it everywhere at once, so fast that no one had time to run or scrub or send a stranger to anyone's house. Holloway and Cole, arrested at the start of their shift. Sergeant Boyd pulled out of the office he thought was safe. Lieutenant Hartley decorated, senior, hands clean for so long taken from behind the desk, with his name on the door of the whole department, by federal agents who answered to no one in that town. Joe watched it happen from across the room, just one anonymous cop in a building full of them. Exactly as Emily had promised, no one ever knew it had started with him. And when it was done, when the men who thought themselves untouchable were sitting in cells of their own, Emily stood outside, that building, the gray morning light, the same light she'd walked out into weeks ago, with her shoulder aching and her wrists raw, and she thought about Michael, a promise made by a dying man to his brothers, about how she'd carried that promise in her pocket for years without ever spending it. But one night she finally had to. Her phone buzzed. From Victor, 3 words. He led with his heart. With your head. He'd be proud of both. Emily read it twice. Herbishes. Then she put the phone away and she squared her shoulders and she walked toward the courthouse where it would all finally come into the light, where Curtis Ward's name would finally be spoken out loud, where Rachel would finally get her answer, where a widow they'd tried to break was out to bring an entire corrupt machine to its knees. With violence, with the truth. Exactly the way she'd promised. That room was full before the doors were supposed to open. Emily had seen a lot of trials in 20 years, but she'd never seen a gallery like this one. People had come from all over the county, people she recognized from the file. People whose complaints had vanished, people whose names had been dragged through the mud, people who'd stopped believing anyone would ever listen. Word had spread the way it always does in a town that's been quietly bleeding for years. Somebody finally stood up, and they'd come to watch, because they needed to see with their own eyes that it was real. It wasn't going to disappear, like everything else always disappeared. Back row, quiet, hats off, sat 6 men the whole town had been taught to fear. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. They were just there, a wall of them, steady and silent, the way they'd been steady and silent through the whole thing, the way they'd promised a dying man they'd be. And in the second row, gripping the wooden rail in front of her, enough to whiten her knuckles, Rachel Ward. Emily had gone to her that morning, where any of it started, and sat with her in the hallway and taken her hands the way she had in the diner. You don't have to do this, Emily had told her. Already given more than anyone had a right to ask. But if you want to walk out that door right now, I will carry the rest of it myself. No one will ever blame you. I've been walking outdoors for 2 years, Rachel had said. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes weren't. I walked away from that station because they made me feel crazy. Walked away from my daddy's name because everybody told me to let it go. Sir, I'm done walking. She'd looked at Emily. I want to be in the room when they say his name. So she was in the room. Pair of them sat at the defense table, and Emily studied them the way she studied everything, filing it, cataloging it, remembering it. Holloway looked younger than he had on the street corner, and smaller, the swagger gone out of him entirely. Cole wouldn't look at anyone. Sergeant Boyd stared at the table in front of him like a man trying to wake up from a dream. Hartley looked calm. That was the thing that made Emily's stomach tighten. Even here, Lieutenant Hartley, with his back straight and his hands folded, and an expression of mild, patient dignity, like a man who'd been caught up in a terrible misunderstanding and was confident it would be sorted out shortly. He'd worn that clean face for so long he didn't know how to take it off. A whole career letting other men's hands get dirty so his could stay pristine. And he still believed, right up to this moment, that the cleanliness would save him. He thinks he's going to walk, Emily realized. He still thinks he's untouchable. He's sitting there certain that when the lights come on, they'll shine right off him. And that, she understood, going to be the sweetest part. The prosecutor rose, and she did exactly what Emily had known she'd do. She didn't start with the biggest thing. It's small. She started careful. She built it the way Emily had built it, one link at a time, so that by the time she reached the top of the ladder, there would be nowhere left for Hartley to stand. She started with the arrest. Footage played on a screen where the whole courtroom could see it. Emily watched the gallery watch it, watched them, see her raise her hands, keep them up, watched Holloway grab her wrist and twist it before she'd moved. She heard the sound that went through the room, that low collective intake of breath. And she watched Holloway's lawyer object and get overruled, and watched Holloway himself shrink down another inch in his chair. Video. Angela, brave Angela, who'd almost deleted it, sat up all night arguing with herself, took the stand and confirmed she'd filmed it. The prosecutor played the part from before the arrest. Cole's voice, tinny and clear, filling the silent courtroom. You sure it's her? Sarge sent the photo himself. Federal. Been sniffing around our files for months. The room went dead still, as everyone understood all at once what they'd just heard. And a mistake. This wasn't two cops having a bad day. This was an order spoken out loud, captured by accident. The sergeant sent the photo, and every head in that gallery turned slowly toward the defense table. Third Sergeant Boyd, who had gone the color of ash. Boyd's lawyer was on his feet, but there was nothing to say. Argue with a man's own recorded voice. And Emily watched Hartley. She watched him keep his composure. She watched him keep that clean and face. Because Hartley had always known that Boyd sending a photo didn't touch him. Boyd could go down. Holloway and Cole could go down. Air could burn from the bottom, halfway up. And Hartley would still be standing at the top with his clean hands folded, because he never touched the bottom. That was the whole architecture of his life. Let the men below you do the dirty work, and when it collapses under them. He thinks the audio ends at Boyd. Emily thought. He thinks the trail stops one rung below him. Almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then the prosecutor called the next witness, and it was a records analyst, dry and technical. And she walked the jury through something that sounded impossibly boring until you understood what it was. This log, a federal database. A file, Emily's file, her personnel photo, the one that had been sitting on a patrol laptop screen that morning. And the terminal that had pulled it. Can you tell the court, the prosecutor said, which terminal and department accessed that federal file on the morning in question? There's only one terminal in the building with clearance to reach a federal database, the analyst said. Located in a private office. Whose office? Lieutenant Hartley's. The word moved through the courtroom like a current. Emily watched Hartley's clean face flicker. Just once. Just for a fraction of a second. A crack in the porcelain. This was the one thing he'd never accounted for, the one time in his whole careful career he'd had to touch the dirty work himself. It was a federal file was above every login but his own letters because there had been no one below him he could push it down to. And can you tell the court, the prosecutor continued, login accessed that file? At what time? The login belonging to Lieutenant Hartley, the analyst said, 6:52 a.m., approximately 40 minutes before the arrest. Hartley's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection: logins can be shared, accessed by others. Login is not a person. We'll get to that, the prosecutor said mildly. And Emily almost smiled because she'd told the prosecutor exactly what Hartley's defense would be. The prosecutor had built the answer in advance. As a login could be shared, that was true. A clever lawyer could put doubt in a juror's mind. Anyone could have used Hartley's login, then could have sat at his terminal. Unless there was a witness who'd seen it with his own eyes. Unless someone inside that building had looked at that log and known what it meant and been sick about it for weeks, finally trusted one person enough to say so. But Emily had promised Delgado his name would never come up. She'd promised he'd stay just one anonymous cop in a building full of them. And she intended to keep that promise, which was why she'd built the case so that Delgado never had to take the stand at all, so that the log stood on its own, so heavy and so specific that it didn't need him. That was the part Hartley didn't understand yet. That was the part none of them understood. Emily hadn't just gathered evidence, gathered it in a shape where no single person she was protecting ever had to stand alone in the light. Delgado protected. Angela exposed only to the one thing she'd freely chosen to film. Emily had spent 20 years learning how to win without spending the people who trusted her, and she'd spent every ounce of that learning here. The prosecutor moved on. And now she started to climb the last rung. I'll call Rachel Ward. Emily watched the girl stand. Watched her walk to the stand on legs that were shaking. Watched her sit and take the oath and grip the edge of the witness box the way she'd gripped the rail in the gallery. For one terrible second, Emily was afraid that after everything in this room full of the men who'd made her feel crazy, Rachel would freeze, would break, would walk out the last door. Then Rachel looked up, and she found Emily's face in the gallery, and she found the 6 silent men in the back row, and she found something in herself that 2 years of being told she was crazy hadn't managed to kill. That's your name for the court, the prosecutor said. Ward. Her voice was small. Then she cleared her throat, again, louder. Rachel Ward. My father was Curtis Ward. And how did your father die? Rachel's eyes filled, but her voice didn't break. It was an accident, she said. A traffic stop that went wrong. They told me for 2 years. Every person I asked, every officer I begged, looked me in the eye and told me my father died in an accident and that I needed to accept it and move on. She stopped. She breathed. My father was about to expose them. He had proof. Those witnesses, complaints, documented. Blow the whole thing open. And he died in their custody. The report that said it was an accident was signed by that man. And she raised her hand, and she pointed, and her finger did not waver, Lieutenant Hartley. In the lie about my father. He looked at the truth of how my daddy died, and he signed his name to a lie, and then his people told me I was crazy for 2 years. The courtroom was so silent. Emily could hear the clock on the wall. Hartley's clean face was gone now. It was just gone. Whatever he'd been holding on to for a whole career, the dignity, the distance, the certainty that the dirt would never reach him, it had finally been pulled away. Everyone, by a 19-year-old girl who'd waited 2 years to point her finger at the man who signed the lie. Objection, Hartley's lawyer said, but his voice had lost something. Speculation. The witness has no direct knowledge. The report bears the defendant's signature, the prosecutor said. That's not speculation. That's a document, and we'll be entering it into evidence alongside the medical examiner's original findings, the ones that were never made public, which do not match the report. Lieutenant Hartley signed, and there it was. Emily watched it land, because that was the last piece, the one Daniel had pulled through channels. No one asked about the original medical findings, and that showed Curtis Ward hadn't died in any accident, the way for 2 years, never matching the report Hartley had signed his name to. The truth of how Curtis Ward died, sitting right next to the lie, in the same courtroom for a jury to hold in their two hands and weigh. You can argue with a witness. You can argue with a login. You can even argue with a recording. You cannot argue with two documents side by side in your own signature that say two different things about how a man died. Lee knew it. Emily saw the exact moment he knew it. Her whole life watching, men realized the floor was gone. And she watched it happen to Lieutenant Hartley in real time, watched the clean face crumble, watched him turn to his lawyer, watched his lawyer have nothing to give him. Watched a man who'd spent 30 years certain he was untouchable finally understand that he'd been touched. The lights were on, and that his hands, his careful decades, were not clean at all. They were the dirtiest hands in the building. He'd just hidden them better. The trial ran 3 weeks. Everyone in that courtroom knew from the moment Rachel Ward pointed her finger, it was going to end. Witness after witness came forward. People who'd been told they were crazy, told to move on, told their complaints had never been filed. They came because Emily's case had cracked something open. And once it was open, all the silence that had been dammed up for years came pouring through. A woman whose report about Holloway had vanished. A man Cole had shaken down for cash. A witness to another accident that had never been what the paperwork said. And alone had been nothing one person, easy to dismiss, or to bury. But together, all of them at once, in a room with the lights on, they were an avalanche. And every one of them, Emily noticed, stood a little straighter when they saw the 6 silent men in the back row. Because word had gotten around about that too, that the reason any of this was happening, the reason the evidence hadn't vanished, like everything always vanished, was that a group of men the whole town had feared had spent weeks quietly, patiently, without a single act of violence, making sure the truth survived long enough to reach a courtroom. Reyes never took the stand. Emily kept that promise. It had pointed her toward Curtis Ward, and Curtis Ward's documents had done the rest. He stayed 4 counties away, safe and hidden. His name never spoken. But Sam drove out to see him the week the verdicts came down, told him what had happened, and Reyes, the broken man who'd said he'd never speak, put his face in his hands at a diner booth and wept. Tell her thank you. Tell her she did the thing I couldn't. Tell her she carried it. Delgado never took the stand either. He stayed just one anonymous cop in a building full of them. There's exactly as promised. And when the department was gutted and rebuilt in the months that followed, he was one of the ones left standing, one of the few who'd never had anything to hide. He came to find Emily once, quietly after it was all over. But he didn't say much. He just shook her hand for a long time, and his eyes were wet, and he said, "You kept me out of it. You didn't have to. It would have been easier to put me on that stand." And Emily said, "Easier for me, not for you. And I don't win the easy way." And Delgado nodded like a man who'd just been taught something he'd carry the rest of his life. Verdicts came down on a Thursday guilty. All of them. Holloway and Cole for the false arrest, the assault, the shakedowns, the whole ugly pattern of it. Boyd for the orders he'd given and the complaints he'd buried. Lieutenant Hartley, with his clean face and his careful decades, guilty of the corruption at the top of all of it. Guilty of signing the lie about how Curtis Ward died. Guilty of a whole architecture of protection built on other men's dirty hands. Emily was in the room when they read it. She watched Hartley stand to hear the verdict, and she watched him try, last time, a clean face back on, and she watched it fail. There was nothing left to be clean about. Lights were on. Everyone had seen. And when it was done, when the gavel had come down and the bailiffs had come forward, Emily did something she'd never done in 20 years of trials. She stood up. She wasn't a witness at that point. She wasn't required to say anything. Her part was technically over. But she stood up and she asked the judge for a moment, something the way she asked, or maybe just the weight of everything that had happened in that room made the judge grant it. And Emily Carter walked to the front of the courtroom, and she stood where the whole room could see her, where the 4 convicted men could see her, and she spoke. She didn't speak with anger. She'd earned anger. She had every right to it. But she'd learned a long time ago that anger was what men like Hartley expected, what they knew how to fight, what they could turn back around on you. As she left it out, she spoke quietly. The way she'd spoken on the street corner with her hands raised, the way she'd spoken in the cell, the way she'd spoken to a frightened young officer with a paper cup of water. "Sir, you didn't hurt me because I was weak," she said. Adam was silent. "You hurt me because you looked at me, a tired middle-aged woman with an old bag, walking by herself, and you decided I was someone who would never fight back. I watched you decide it. I watched it happen on your faces on that street corner. Whole bodies relaxed because you thought, this one's alone. There's nothing. This one has nobody." She let that sit. Thorough, and you were half right. I was alone. I've been alone for a long time. My husband died years ago, and I never learned how to ask anyone for help. I built my whole life on the idea that I had to carry everything myself. She paused. About her. "But you were wrong about the part that mattered," she said. "Honors, because being alone, having nobody are not the same thing. I just found that out the night you put me in that cell. But I made one phone call, one to people I'd been too proud to ask for anything in 20 years. And they didn't come with fists. They didn't come to burn your station down. God knows some of them wanted to. They came with patience and with the truth. They spent weeks quietly finding every single thing you thought you'd buried. And they did it without breaking one law because they understood something you never did." She looked directly at Hartley. "Keeping your hands clean by making other people do the dirty work," she said. "And you thought that made you safe. You thought that made you untouchable. What it really meant was that when the truth finally came, it came for all of you at once, and there was nobody left below you to take the fall. You built a ladder of people to stand on, Lieutenant. And you never once thought about what happens to the man at the top when the whole ladder falls." Hartley didn't answer. There was nothing to say. "Curtis Ward told the truth," Emily said, and her voice changed, went softer, went to the girl in the second row. He told it when it was dangerous. He told it when everyone around him was lying. He told it knowing what it might cost him, and it cost him everything. And for 2 years, his daughter stood outside your station in the cold, asking one simple question: what really happened to my father? And every one of you looked her in the eye and told her she was crazy. She turned to Rachel Ward. "But you weren't crazy," Emily said, and her own voice caught just slightly. "You were the only person in this whole town who refused to stop telling the truth. Your father's daughter, all the way down. And everything that happened in this room, every verdict, every witness, every buried thing that finally came to light, none of it happens without you. The reason. Remember that for the rest of your life. And it was easier to walk away. You stayed. And you brought them all down." Rachel was crying. She was smiling through it, and she was nodding. Like Emily met her, and for the first time since finally set something down that she'd been carrying for 2 years. They turned back to the room. "I'm going to say one more thing," she said, "and then I'm done. Every person in this gallery who ever had a complaint disappear, who was ever told to move on, who was ever made to feel crazy for knowing what they knew, I want you to hear this. You were not powerless. You never were. They needed you to believe you were. A person who believes they're powerless doesn't fight. That was the whole trick. That was the only thing holding this up." She looked around at all of them. The moment one person stopped believing it, the whole thing came down. It always works. That's the thing men like this are most afraid of. Violence, not anger. Just one person who refuses to believe they're too small to matter. She stepped back. "You didn't attack a helpless woman," she said quietly, only to the 4 men at the table. "You attacked someone you thought was helpless. That mistake cost you everything. I hope wherever you're going, you have a long time to think about the difference." And she walked back to her seat. It was rebuilt in the months that followed. Several cases were reopened, not just Curtis Ward's, but dozens of them. A whole backlog of vanished complaints and rewritten reports finally pulled into the light and given the review they'd always deserved. People who'd suffered in silence for years got answers, apologies. Some got settlements. None of it undid what had been done. Emily knew better than anyone that you can't undo it, but it meant that for the first time in a long time, the machine in that town was pointed the right way. Her ward got her father's death officially reclassified. The word accident was struck from the record, and the truth was put in its place of the amended file where it had never been before. Notice Ward's real cause of death and the finding that he'd died a whistleblower, protecting the public, doing exactly what a good man is supposed to do. Rachel had it framed. She hung it in her apartment. She told Emily it was the first full night of sleep she'd had in 2 years. On a gray afternoon, after it was all finished, Emily drove out past the edge of town to the small memorial where Michael was buried, and she wasn't alone when she got there. 6 men were already waiting Victor. Sam and Daniel, Richard, Tommy, and the others' hats in their hands. The thing is a loose half circle around the stone, the way they must have stood at the funeral years ago, back when Emily had been too numb with grief to really see them. Now. She walked up beside Victor and stood there for a while, not saying anything, looking at Michael's name cut into the stone. After a long moment, she spoke. "You know what the strangest part is," she said. "For years, I thought asking you for help would mean I'd failed. Like Michael left me one thing to carry, and if I couldn't carry it alone, I'm down." She shook her head slowly. "I had it exactly backwards. He didn't leave me something to carry alone. He left me you. It was the gift, and I was too proud to open it for years." Victor was quiet for a moment. "You want to know what he actually said?" he asked. "Last time, when he made us promise." Emily looked at him. Her boss had said, "She's going to think I left her alone," Victor said. "I think the strong thing is to never need anybody. The world's going to come at her, and she's going to try to stand against it all by herself, because that's who she is." His voice roughened. "So don't wait for her to ask. Never ask. Just be there. And when the day comes, understand that needing us was never weakness. It was the one thing she never learned, that letting people love you takes more strength than doing it all alone." Emily's eyes filled. "That," she whispered. "Word for word," Victor said. "I've been carrying it for years, waiting for the right time to give it to you. This is the right time." Emily looked at the stone, at the name, at the man who, they're dying, or even from years in the ground, had somehow reached forward through time and made sure that on the worst night of her life, I'd be alone. "You didn't protect me because I was important," she said quietly. "All of them. There are more important people in the world than a widow nobody recognized on a street corner. As you protected me because you're family," Victor said. "The whole reason. That's the only reason we ever need." Emily nodded. Didn't quite speak for a moment. "That's what family does," she finally managed. "What family does," Victor agreed. They stood there together a while longer. And the 6 men the world had been taught to fear, quiet, saying nothing, needing to say nothing, finally understood finally and completely the thing it had taken her whole life and one terrible night to learn. They had never fought with violence, not once. Every man standing at that memorial could have torn that town apart with his bare hands, and not one of them had. They'd fought with patience, with evidence. They'd fought by refusing to let the truth die quietly, the way so many truths had died quietly before. They'd taken the most feared thing in that town and used it to protect the most overlooked person in it, and they'd won clean, complete, undeniable without spending a single one of the people who trusted them along the way. That was the real power, not the badge Hartley had hidden behind, not the fear Boyd had traded on, not the muscle everyone assumed those 6 men lived by. Or was quieter than all of it and stronger than all of it, and it belonged to anyone brave enough to pick it up or to stand alone when everyone expects you to surrender, or of people who refuse to let injustice win. And the simple, staggering truth that the person the whole world writes off as powerless, the tired woman with the old bag, the girl outside a station, the broken man, 4 counties away, nervous young cop with a paper cup of water, is very often the exact person who, when they finally stop believing they're too small to matter, brings the entire rotten machine crashing down. Emily Carter had been alone on that street corner. She had never been alone since. And the men who'd looked at her and seen someone powerless had learned, too late, the oldest and most dangerous truth there is no one on this earth more unstoppable than a person who has finally decided they will not be broken and who discovers, in the moment they need it most, that they were never standing alone. Because they didn't attack a helpless woman, they woke one up. A quiet decency of people who had every reason to look away and didn't. What was the thing Emily came to understand in the months that followed, the thing that settled into her slowly the way truth always did not in the courtroom, in the headlines, but in the ordinary mornings after, when the town went back to being an ordinary town, and she went back to being a woman who drank coffee she'd watched get poured. Harry got out, of course. It always does. Somewhere along the way, someone talked to a reporter, and the reporter talked to another, and before long, people who'd never set foot in that county knew the shape of what had happened. The federal investigator they'd tried to break, the widow with the old leather bag, the 6 men the world had been taught to fear, who'd brought a corrupt machine down without lifting a hand in violence. People wanted to make Emily into something, a symbol, a face for a cause. She let them up to a point. Understood that people need symbols, that a town that has been quietly bleeding for years needs to believe that standing up is possible. All person can matter. If her face helps somebody, or decide not to stay silent, then fine. Let them have the face. Emily knew the truth was quieter than any symbol. The truth was that she hadn't done it alone, and she never could have. The truth was that the whole thing had turned, not on her courage, but on a chain of small, decent choices made by people who had every reason to make the other choice. Thumb hovering over delete, choosing not to press it. Reyes, 4 counties away and broken, choosing to speak one time in the dark. With a kid and a mortgage and everything to lose, choosing to look at a log he wished he'd never seen, and then choosing to trust one stranger with it. Next, Rachel, who'd been called crazy for 2 years, choosing to point her finger and not let it waver. None of them had been powerful. Not one. That was the whole point. But the thing Emily turned over and over in the quiet mornings. Power hadn't saved that town. Power was what had broken it. Hartley's power. The power of men who'd learned they could rewrite reality and make people believe they were crazy. For remembering the truth. What had saved it was the opposite of power. It was a handful of people with almost nothing who each did one small brave thing at the exact moment it mattered, and trusted that somebody would carry it the rest of the way. And Emily had carried it. That was her part. Not the bravery. Plenty of people had been braver, risked more, had more to lose. Her part had been the carrying. 20 years had taught her one thing above all others. People who tell the truth are almost never the ones with the power to make it stick. And witness, the broken cop, the grieving daughter, they hold the truth, protect it, and so most of the time the truth dies in their hands quietly, and the machine grinds on. What those people needed wasn't someone braver than they were. They needed someone who would take the terrible thing they knew and carry it somewhere safe and shield them while they did it, and never, not once, for convenience, not to make it easier, spend them along the way. That was what Michael had seen in her all those years ago. What Victor had finally understood in one long night. That Emily hit hard. That she refused to sacrifice the people who trusted her, but even when sacrificing them would have been the fastest way to win. About that a lot. In the quiet after, she thought about how easy it would have been to put Delgado on the stand. Much cleaner the case would have looked with a living witness to that log, instead of a dry records analyst walking a jury through timestamps. Every instinct in the system pushed toward it, use the witness in the case, and if the witness pays for it later, that's the cost of justice. Emily had watched that logic destroy people her whole career. Watched prosecutors burn through witnesses like fuel. Watched informants get used up and thrown away. Watched the machinery of justice treat the people who fed it as expendable. And she had decided a long time ago, after one early case where a man died because she'd been careless with him, that she would never win that way again. She would rather lose clean than win dirty. She had said it to Sam in that clubhouse, and she had meant it all the way down. And here was the strange thing, the thing she hadn't expected. Winning clean had turned out to be the stronger way, not the weaker one. Because a case built on used up, hurted people is a case built on sand the witnesses recant, the informants disappear, the whole thing collapses under the weight of its own cruelty. But a case built on people you protected, people you kept safe, people who trusted you and were right to that case holds. Reyes never wavered because Reyes was never exposed. No, never cracked because Delgado was never put in a position to. Testified with her chin up because she'd chosen her own risk with her eyes open. And Emily had honored that choice instead of demanding more. Her clean way wasn't the noble but losing way. It was the way that actually won. Because the thing Emily wished she could teach every young investigator who'd ever sat across from her, convinced that the ends justified whatever means got you there. Don't justify the means are the ends. You win is what you win. And a victory that costs you the people who trusted you isn't a victory at all. It's just a different kind of corruption wearing a badge that says justice. She kept the paper cup on her desk to remember that. Came by once more, near the end of that first year. It was different now, smaller, humbler, still finding its feet, but honest in a way it hadn't been in a generation. He was in plainclothes. He'd made detective. He stood in her doorway a little awkwardly, the way he'd stood outside her cell, and he told her his daughter had started kindergarten, and that some nights he still lay awake, thinking about how close he'd come to saying nothing. Almost didn't come to your cell, he said. You know that? I stood in that hallway for 10 minutes telling myself to walk away, telling myself it wasn't my problem, telling myself 100 good reasons to keep my mouth shut. He shook his head. Then I thought about my kid, about the kind of man I'd be raising her to think I was. I couldn't do it. I couldn't walk away and still look at her. That's the whole thing, Emily said quietly. Right there. That's everything. Everybody thinks courage is some big dramatic moment. It's 10 minutes in a hallway arguing with yourself, and then taking one step you can't take back. She looked at him. Because you took the step, Marcus. Most people don't. That's the only difference between the people who change things and the people who don't. Not that they're braver. It's that when the moment came, they took the step. He looked at the paper cup on her desk. He recognized it. She saw him recognize it. You kept that, he said. I keep it where I can see it every morning, Emily said. So I never forget what it actually cost you to bring it to me. I never forget what I owe the people who trust me with the truth. She paused. You're the reason it worked, you know. Not me. You was the thing Hartley couldn't beat. And the log came from you. And you did it with everything to lose and nothing to gain. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you were just a small part of it. It turned on. Delgado's eyes were wet. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he nodded once and shook her hand the long way again and left. Emily sat alone with the cup and thought about the arc of the whole thing, how it had started with two men on a street corner who'd looked at her and seen someone with nobody, someone alone, someone powerless, how completely they'd misjudged her. In the end, they hadn't misjudged her at all because she had been alone. She had had nobody she was willing to call. She had spent 20 years building a fortress of self-sufficiency that was really just pride wearing armor. They'd read her correctly on that street corner. She really was, their moment, exactly as isolated as they believed. Their mistake wasn't misreading her. Their mistake was thinking that isolation was permanent. The person alone stays alone. That a woman with no one to call has no one to call forever. Understand that the difference between powerless and powerful is often just one phone call, one moment of, finally, after years of refusing, reaching out and letting someone catch you. That was the thing Emily wanted people to understand more than anything. Rooms, more than the corruption or the courtroom or any of it. Everyone has that phone call. Everyone. Somewhere in every life there is a number that, if you were only brave enough to dial it, would remind you that you were never as alone as they needed you to believe. Emily, it had been Victor. For Rachel, it had been Emily. For Reyes, it had been a biker in a diner who swore his name would stay in the dark. of it, person to person, each one catching the next. That was the whole architecture of how the truth had survived. One hero, a chain of frightened, decent people, each choosing to reach out, each choosing to catch the one who reached. She looked out the window a long time. Then she picked up the paper cup and she turned it slowly in her hands, the way Delgado had turned it that night. And she made herself a promise she'd already been keeping for a year without saying it out loud. That she would answer the phone. Whenever it rang, whenever some frightened person with a terrible truth and no one to protect it finally worked up the nerve to dial a number they weren't sure would even pick up, she would be the one who answered. The way Victor had answered her, the way the whole chain had held, link by link, all the way to a courtroom where a 19-year-old girl finally got to say her father's name out loud. Because that was the debt, not to the dead, not even to the truth, to the next person standing alone in a hallway, arguing with themselves, a step away from staying silent. Emily set the cup back on her desk, and the next morning, when the phone rang, she answered it on the first ring.